So in this video, I'm going to go over a few tips and tricks, hacks for taping drop handlebars. So what we're going to do first is got to pull these hoods back, and I don't know how well you can see it, but these bars are starting to get pretty, or the tape here is starting to get pretty haggard. So we're going to go ahead and place the tape. We've got our finishing tape here, some lizard skin tape, and then the lizard skin finishing tape. And you know, anytime you're taping bars, if you've never done it, you've got some bars that are taped. It's kind of, you know, you can learn a little bit just by undoing and taping the bars. So got some of the electrical tape and then the finishing tape. And so as far as taping bars, I've been doing this since 1983, basically. Pretty high production bike mechanic, working in the bike industry since then. So definitely take my fair share of bars, and I would say my methods through that time have changed quite a bit. Well, not quite a bit, but somewhat. And so the method I'm going to demonstrate today is basically just I don't know, kind of what I've discovered, which is the simplest and method to use, works the best. It's quick to do, but it lasts a pretty long time. So, you know, a couple things as far as retaping your handlebars. Typically this is something I'll do, I don't know, on most people's bikes that I work on, or my personal bikes, probably about annually or so. You know, it's, if you're somebody that sweats pretty heavily, rides the trainer a lot, you may want to do it more frequently. I don't really have any pictures, any documentation, but you know, I've seen some where especially aluminum bars, where they've got so corroded from sweat that they, you know, I've seen them where they actually just basically break apart, which can be a pretty dangerous situation. So this is really, it's a good time to, you know, if you're going to do kind of your annual tune-up type thing, it's a good time to, you know, as you're wrapping the bars, you know, maybe replacing your cables. It's pretty easy to do all at that time. So, alright, so we've got plugs out. And so, let's just pretend we're going to replace the cables. This particular set of bars, I did these a while back, and it looks like I've got two sections of electrical tape here where I've taped down the cables. You know, I've seen some people that like to tape pretty much the whole way, you know, thinking that the cables can slip. And this actual set of bars has a little, kind of a little indentation underneath in there, so it kind of holds them securely. So I don't think you really need all that, or you know, something like shipping tape or something that's a little more robust to hold those in place. It kind of depends on the handlebar and whatnot. So anyway, we're here at this point. You know, this is a good time to check things like make sure the brake levers are tight and basically at the same angle. One thing I like to do is just take a, you know, basic, like a ruler, and put it on the straight edge portion of the drop there, and kind of see where you are brake lever wise, as far as where your lever lines up. You know, it honestly looks like this side might be just be a hair higher than this side. So things like that, you know, these things can slip. They're about the same. They can slip over time. So, you know, or bike falls over, they can get a little crooked or whatnot. So it's always a good time when you're doing this to make sure everything's lined up square. You know, your bolts are tight there that secure the shift levers, the shift brake levers. I'm not going to call it the B word that people like to use, but anyway, yeah, make sure that's all good lined up and you're good to go. Replace your cables. I've got a few videos on doing some of that. So anyway, kind of the first little hack there that we can do, or tip, you know, there's things like the, you know, Physique and Specialized have the bar fat stuff that lays up across the, you know, the handlebars on the drops and then maybe on the tops here. You know, I've seen where guys will double wrap them and stuff, but the only problem with that is it really, you know, it increases the just the diameter of the bar so big sometimes you can't even hardly get a good grip on it. But one thing I've done a few times in the past is, you know, I'll just take some extra maybe handlebar tape. This is just kind of a gel tape, and you can kind of guesstimate where how long a piece you're going to need there. But maybe lay it out, and then you can just, you know, I'll just go ahead and mark it. Usually I'll just cut it with scissors, but you want to maybe take a couple kind of V sections there. Take with your scissors. Kind of one thing I forgot to mention, it's good, you know, basically we're going to need some electrical tape and some scissors to perform this task here. Cut like a couple sections there, and then you can, you know, just apply your tape there where you want it, you know, depending on how far back you want it. So you want to put it in the spots where you're going to be resting your hands primarily, which, you know, as my tape is worn, you can see I've, you know, this area here is where I probably am resting my hands the most often. So, you know, that's nice, you know, as far as gravel bikes, things like that, where you're, you know, constantly having some vibrations in rough terrain. It's good to add some extra padding there sometimes. So, you know, that's one little hack there that I've definitely used this in the past. Kind of helps, gives you a little extra padding there, but it doesn't increase the diameter of your handlebars to a ginormous diameter there. So, all right, so I've got this tape here. This is just some takeoff tape. It's in pretty great condition that I just decided to reuse on this bike. And so, as far as just to start with, there's a couple different methods here. So, for one, you've got some folks like to use what I would call the flush mount, where they'll start wrapping the bars with, you know, right at the edge of the tape. Personally, I like to do it where you overlap it, maybe about half the tape. You know, start with the tape on the bottom, and then just wrap it around from there. From there, you can tuck your plug in and then go along. The reason I like to do that, to tuck it in, is two reasons actually. You know, it keeps it from unwinding there at the bottom, for one, and then two, once you have your plug in, you kind of have this extra little kind of a little buffer or a little padding, you know, so if you go down in a crash or something, you smack your leg into that, it's not going to you don't have that sharp edge. You've kind of got like a rounded padded edge there. So that's probably actually the main reason. But so anyway, we're going to start with this side, and then you also have as far as taping directions, you know, there's lots of different methods. I've worked with several different mechanics who, you know, everybody's kind of got their own personal way. You know, if you're doing this on your own bike, I would kind of find the way that works best for you. I'm going to show you the way I like to do it. You know, there's the Calvin Jones method that he shows on the Park Tool video, where, you know, he basically starts this direction switches it up here and then goes the reverse direction up here, with the concept of, you're going to be, when you're on the bars here, you're going to be twisting that way. You're up here climbing, you're twisting this way. So, you're going to unravel the bars either which way. But, that's mostly true, but kind of just from my personal experience, sometimes you're pulling back like this, sometimes you're pushing forward, or you may be resting your arms on the bars and you're pushing forward. So, and it's the same thing here. Sometimes you're pushing, sometimes you're pulling. So, sometimes you're pulling like that, sometimes you're, it just varies. So, the main thing that I would, that I find works best is just to wrap them tight, get it at the right pressure. Now, it kind of keeps it from, if you get good pressure, good overlap, typically that's not an issue. It's really more of from what I found, more of a technique issue than anything else. So anyway, the way I like to do it though is I like to start and then wrap the ends in this direction. So you're coming from the bottom, coming up and over to the outside of the handlebar. And again, it's just personal preference. That's what I found works best for me. So you basically start at the bottom, and then as you're coming up on your second wrap around, I feel like this gives you the cleanest look. Once you have your plug taped in, this bar, it's coming just off the edge there. So, and once you get your plug in, it gives it a nice clean look. So we're just going to wrap along here. Lots of pressure. And a lot of times on new handlebar tape, they'll give you the two pieces that you can use, to cover this piece. Some of the older brake levers and whatnot, you kind of need that because the hood doesn't come back very far. Otherwise, I would just use them to kind of test the tape, see how hard you can pull on it, kind of find the breaking point, I guess you could say. But I'm wrapping this pretty tight, and kind of just another thing you can do is you're wrapping it, kind of twist along with the tape. This tape does not, some tapes have an adhesive backing. This tape's got like a little kind of a gel strip here, and it is a pretty robust, this is I think some of the Shimano Pro, their Pro branded tape, so it's kind of got it's not lightweight, it's kind of a thick synthetic leather feel. Anyway, so you're getting to this point, almost to the brake lever, and it just depends on how you time it out. I'll usually leave just a small gap here between that final wrap maybe and then the bottom of the, and it just varies. You're just going to end up where you end up when you're wrapping, so you can kind of redo it if you need to get into the sweet spot. But I'm doing this with just a slight gap in between here. Then we're going to come up over the top. This is kind of just the basic figure 8 method. I didn't really adapt this method until the hood started to get really long. And a lot of people don't like this because they say it builds it up too much, in this area, but if you do it right, it actually doesn't. So going up and over the lever there and then back down. And so with that little gap that we left there initially, we're going to fill that in with this layer, and we're going to come back up and again and then go halfway over this first strip that we laid down there. And so honestly, it's not really any thicker all the way around. It's super quick. So you want just a decent amount of overlap. Try to keep it consistent. Again, this tape was on something else, so hopefully I got enough here to get me through the end. So this bar is going to be pretty easy because you have you got this rounded section. This is kind of a flatter, kind of a semi-arrow type bar with a flat top to it. and there's an indentation here. So basically we're just going to go to the edge of that hump there, so it's pretty easy to know where everything's are. You know, you can do you can do things like once you finish, or you kind of know where you want to finish, mark it with your scissors, just your finger, and then you kind of have a good idea where you're going to finish on the other side to keep the spacing even. You know, there's in the Calvin Jones video, the Park Tools video, he finishes his tape where he's going to finish the where the your tape there to hold the cables down is going to finish at the same spot basically as his actual handlebar tape there. So that's a pretty good little tip there as well. We're not really going to do that on these just because we have this indicator there. And this is actually what kind of ended up perfect. This tape has already been cut right there, so that's exactly where we wanted to finish. And this is the biggest error I see with people doing their own handlebar taping, is knowing what direction to cut this. I see this all the time cut like this. But really all you got to do as far as where you're finishing your cut here where you want it to end, so you can just take your scissors, line it up. That's where you're going to make your cut. You know, if the tape is coming over this way, you just line your scissors up and cut it right there. So it's pretty simple. And that way, you know, once you get your last bit around, you got a nice straight line there. So always good to have your scissors and tape in close proximity. I've got my tape just hanging right there on the stand. I don't like to cut strips and things to have on there. I like to just kind of go with how I'm doing it. This tape here is the, I like this electrical tape. This is the 3M, it's a Super 33 Plus, which is super, it's kind of a super pliable, kind of a grippy feeling tape. I'll just go right there, flush with the edge. So mistake number 2 I see a lot, you know, I've seen even bike shops that have done this where they'll have 2 inches of electrical tape, just all, you know, just a big mess. You always want to keep it really not much wider than the actual width of your electrical tape there, if at all possible. I usually will go around maybe 2 or 3 times, just overlapping the edge just slightly there, wrap it pretty tight, and then the final wrapping just let it loose, because what will happen that if you go with your final loop around nice and loose, it kind of resists that tendency for the tape to want to curl back on its own there. And the finishing tape that comes with a lot of your handlebar tape kits, a lot of it's pretty nice. I know, like a lot of the Bontrager stuff is pretty nice, and you know, it's got a nice grippy texture. You know, if you don't, back in, I don't know, 5-10 years ago, it was all kind of just junk, and you would just basically toss it and use some good electrical tape. So that's basically what this is. It's got a nice kind of a grippy texture. It's kind of a rubbery feel to it. So yeah, it works out pretty well. So get to our other side here. So, you know, again, we're going to start tape on the bottom, overlapped about half the width of the tape. Just go straight around, and as I'm coming up and over, you start to angle up. So the edge of the tape there is just coming over the edge there. So it looks really nice once you get your plugs in there. And the key is just, depending on the tape, really firm pressure. Some tapes, you know, like a lot of your cork tapes, you can't pull on them super hard or you'll just rip it apart. But you want to get it as tight as this tape will take, the, you know, probably the better. You know, again, you can just twist into it. Get your putting it on. This tape actually feels pretty dang grippy. So here we're getting, you know, we've got a little bit bigger gap on this side. You know, I can basically back this down a little bit maybe. That was a pretty tight loop there. You know, it's just, you want to try to keep these consistent. With practice it gets easier. So that's a little better there. So we've got maybe a 8mm, 6mm gap in there. So we come up on this side, we'll come up and over the top. Again, the basic figure 8 method. Back down once we come over the top. Kind of doing this from the side, trying to keep a good camera angle. And then from there, see, we're covering up the gap we have down here that's left over. Wrapping over the brake just a little bit more here. And we'll come back up and, you know, kind of as you can see, coming back over halfway over this section. Typically when I'm doing this, I like to stand in the front edge of it. So, you know, kind of again, down, back around, pull it good and tight. I mean, you're gonna have a little bit of a gap sometimes right here, but the hood's gonna come back to this far, so it's not a huge deal. Sometimes you may, you know, you get to this point, you may want to, you know, if you haven't done it many times, you can flip the hood back here just to verify. So if you need to redo something, it's easier to do at this point. See if we get as lucky on this side with the end cut. So we're coming up a little short there. I'm going to back it down. Spread this area out just slightly. There's lots of different types of tape these days. You know, it's always good. You know, sometimes you can go to your local bike shop and you know, nice to be able to feel what you're actually purchasing there. You know, if they have some on some bikes or whatnot. So yeah, this one, I don't really like the way the angle this one's cut. So I'm gonna redo this just a little. The other one was cut at a pretty decent angle. This one, that's kind of shallow, so I don't think it started out on the right track. There we go. Out a little bit more. There we go. And again, with your just brand new tape, this is going to be a lot easier to. You typically aren't going to have to backtrack it. So we're pretty even there. Have to pull it pretty tight again. First couple times over, then like the last one, maybe we'll take it nice and just kind of lay it over there. Like to finish it on the bottom, so it's, you know, out of sight, but you know, it's easy when you go to pull that off, you're gonna know it's on the bottom. So that's pretty good. We don't have any gaps there. Nice and clean. So now we got to put our bar plugs back in. These are some these Bontrager plugs that I had on the bars before. You know, there's whatever, I do them like in the old 69 position. So anyway, you're gonna tuck that in. This takes a little practice, but just tuck that in, and then sometimes you may, you know, it's nice if you have a rubber mallet or something. Depends on how thick the tape is. All right, got that in, got our tape, and we're good to go. Yeah, hopefully you found the video helpful. I've got tons of other bike tutorials and tips, tricks, hacks, that kind of stuff. So please consider subscribing to my channel for all kinds of other stuff. And yeah, that's going to do it for today. Thanks for watching.